The Prisoner's Dilemma is a special category of games, and it's used to model a lot of situations. The interesting dynamic in a Prisoner's Dilemma is that both players have a dominant strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a moment. Well, let's define it now. A dominant strategy is one where a player has a dominant strategy if, no matter what the other player does, the player's best outcome results from playing a single strategy. So that strategy is dominant because no matter what the other player does or the other players do, your best play is always the same. Well, both players have a dominant strategy that they both play then, and we get to a Nash equilibrium. The interesting thing about a Prisoner's Dilemma is that there's some better outcome for both of them that exists, but the dynamics of the game don't get the players that best outcome. Anyway, the example comes from the idea of these two prisoners. Here I've got them labeled Moe and Curly. I grew up watching Three Stooges on Saturdays. Anyway, let's say the police have brought in Moe and Curly, and they've got enough evidence to convict them of some minor crime, possession of cocaine or something, whatever. But they suspect Moe and Curly of armed robbery, for example. But they don't have critical evidence. They don't have the weapon, the witnesses are equivocal, whatever. They need a confession. So they bring both players in, they put them in separate rooms, and then they go at Moe hard. Hey, you better confess. If you don't, Curly is there singing like a canary, and if he confesses and you don't, you're going up the river for a long, long time. And they're of course playing the same game with Curly. If you like police dramas, on NYPD Blue, Sipowicz and Simone did this every single week. L.A. Confidential is a movie where this played out in the critical scene in the movie. Anyway, let's go to the pointer. You see if let's say Moe isn't going to confess. He's a hardened criminal. He's not a stool pigeon. He's got a code of honor. He's not going to confess. So Curly knows Moe is not going to confess. So Curly could confess, and Curly would get to go free, and or Curly could not confess, and he'd get a year in prison for that minor crime. So he's going to cooperate and get the deal, right? If he thinks Moe is not going to confess. So if he thinks Moe is not going to confess, his best play is to confess. Well, let's say he thinks Moe is going to confess. Well, he could not confess, and then he's the one that's up the river for a long time, or he could confess, and in my example here, cut his prison time in half. So again, Curly's best play is to confess. So Curly has a dominant strategy to confess. Do the same analysis. Moe has a dominant strategy to confess. Anyway, they both play their dominant strategies. The one Nash equilibrium in this game is where they both confess. Notice that there is this other better outcome if they could cooperate, where neither one of them confesses. But notice that's not a Nash equilibrium. Let's think about it. If Moe isn't confessing, and Curly is going to say, hey, given that Moe didn't confess, I wish I had confessed, because then I'd be off scot-free instead of being a year in prison. So anyway, it's not a Nash equilibrium. So that's the Prisoner's Dilemma. There are a lot of applications for the Prisoner's Dilemma. One application of the Prisoner's Dilemma is to study oligopoly behavior as a one-shot game. In this view, Boeing and Airbus get together and play a game, and done. And here, we could think of this interaction as having the characteristics of a Prisoner's Dilemma, and here's why. Notice that I'm back to my 1, 2, 3, 4 payoff scale. 1 is the worst, 4 is the best, 3 is better than 2. I've also introduced a convention that I really like, is just to draw diagonals across the payoff boxes. And since Boeing's the player in the upper right, that's the payoff in the upper right is Boeing's payoff in the lower left is Airbus, then it's just sort of an elegant way to do it. You'll see that done quite a bit if you follow if you read anything on game theory. Anyway, let's just check here. If let's say Boeing thinks Airbus is going to price high, well, if they both price high, they both do pretty well. But if Airbus is pricing high and Boeing shaves its price a little bit, Boeing gets all the sales that year. And look, that's Boeing gets all the profits. Boeing just has to shave price a little bit, and he'll steal all the business from Airbus. So that's the best case scenario for Boeing. That's the Boeing's best payoff. So if he thinks Boeing is going to price high, Boeing is likely to price low in this view. Likewise, if Airbus thinks Boeing is going to price high, Airbus has an incentive to price low. Let's think if Boeing is pricing low, Airbus could price high and get its worst outcome, or it could also price low and get an improved outcome. So if they're both pricing low, given that Airbus is pricing low, does Boeing have an incentive to price high? No. 1 is lower than 2. Likewise, given that Boeing is pricing low, does Airbus have an incentive to price high? No. 2 is better than 1. So there's one Nash equilibrium here. It's where both players, again, play their dominant strategy. And in this view, even though there's just 2 firms in the industry, the prisoner's dilemma dynamic in the game will lead to both firms pricing low. And that's bad news for Boeing and Airbus stockholders, but it's good news for the consumer because they get a higher output and a lower price, even when just 2 firms are competing. That's one possible application, and that's a common application of this prisoner's dilemma. This approach is used also to study environmental problems. You could pollute or not pollute, and we see a similar game played. Fishing, you could fish a lot or fish a little, and every fisher has an incentive to fish a lot, and the stock gets depleted. We use this kind of analysis to study athletes that could either take steroids or not, and we see there's this prisoner's dilemma quality of that game has everybody using steroids. The relative position of each bike racer is unchanged, but everybody now has taken steroids and running the risk of ill health. So that's an important game that has a number of applications, some of which we'll do in class.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.